You would, this morning, turn to 2 Kings chapter 5. I want to say that from the call to worship, from the songs that are in the bulletins, from the children's moment that was here, to the prayer that Greg prayed, there's been a lot of confirmation that God is coordinating all of this together today. And so I just want to say thank you to God for doing that. And I hope that I can get that point across to you as well as to me. The passage of Scripture that I'm going to read is a familiar passage that, honestly, I've seen more in it this time than I've ever seen before, many times over. And I think, as was mentioned in Greg's opening prayer, that there's something for everybody in this. It's not just a bullseye to one thing or one person or one situation, but I think there's something in it for all of us. And so I want us to see that this morning by read with me the first 14 verses of chapter 5, 2 Kings. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master, and highly respected because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he would cure him of his leprosy. And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel. Then the king of Aram said, Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, and 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, And now as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And it came about when the king of Israel read the letter, that he tore his clothes and says, Am I God to kill and make alive? That this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. And it happened when Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was furious and went away and said, Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing? Would you not have done it? How much more then when he says, Wash and be clean? So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. I want to tell this story from different perspectives. We see the odds. Naaman was a man of war. He served the king of Aram, valiant warrior, well respected by everybody, the king, his soldiers under him, everybody. The people feared him, but he was a leper. During one of the raids of Israel, they had captured a little girl, and they had taken it to Naaman's house, where she became a servant to his wife. The little girl said to Naaman's wife, she says, if Naaman was in Israel, he could be cured of his leprosy. And Naaman heard of it, and so he what that little girl from Israel said. Now then, let us prepare a gift so that we can go and get this healing. So they take all this gold and all this silver and all this change of clothes, and they go to the king of Israel, and they said, with the letter, and the letter said, here is a gift for you, and what we ask is that you would heal Naaman of his leprosy. Well, at that time, there was no cure for leprosy. None at all. And the king sees this as a plot against him, seeking a chance to quarrel against him. And so he tears his clothes and he says, am I a God who can heal and make people well? And he just, he says, you're just trying to start a fight with me. You're just trying to find some fault in me. You're spying out the land or something. I don't know what it is, but this is not good. But when Elisha heard what had happened, he says, don't be upset, king. Send him to me. So Naaman is sent to the house of Elisha. He goes, stands outside the door of Elisha, and as he comes, Elisha tells his servant, he says, go and tell Naaman, just go wash in the Jordan River, dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and you'll be clean. Your leprosy will be healed. He did not even go out to talk to him himself. Naaman, being a man of war and highly respected by everyone, became very offended. He says he didn't even come out and talk to him. He didn't come out and wave did chicken over me or nothing. He just come out, sent a messenger out and says, go dip in this Jordan River. He says, aren't the rivers of Damascus so much better than anything that's here? And he went off in a rage. He was insulted because he was not respected. He was not honored. It wasn't the way he had it planned. And so as he goes off in a rage, his servant comes to him and says, Naaman, if he had asked you to do something difficult, would you have done it? He says, well, of course. He says, then why not try this? Why not do something simple? And so Naaman, I guess picturing myself, I see Naaman going down into the water as much to prove that his servant was wrong as he was to get the healing. This isn't going to do him good. And he goes down and he dips himself 7 times. And when he comes up the 7th time, his flesh was restored like that of a little child. Now, we look at this story, and I know every time I've looked at it, I always thought the main character was Naaman. But let's look at who the important people in the story really is. First of all, you've got to give the most credit, I believe, to the little girl who was captured from Israel and taken to Naaman's household. This was a little girl who was taken away from her family, taken away from her country, taken away from her people, put in with foreigners, put in with foreign gods, put in a household that she never asked for, did not want, and yet she loved her master. Now think, Hollis' message was talking about St. Patrick and how he had been taken as a slave for 6 years. Imagine being uprooted from your family as a young child and not having hatred for the people that took you, but to have compassion for them. And if it had not been for her, none of the rest of the story would have happened. Naaman would have eventually have succumbed to his illness and his disease, and the end of the story. That would have been it. But because this little girl made the best out of the situation that she was in and had compassion upon Naaman, she says, if my master were in Israel, he could find a cure for his disease. Now then, we know that Naaman then goes to the king, and the king sends him to the king of Israel, and king of Israel is not where you need to go. And so Elisha steps in and says, send him to me. And Elisha tells him just exactly what he needs to do. But it wasn't what Naaman had in mind. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, I'm sure that every one of us at one time or another have been praying for something, and in our mind we had it kind of figured out how we needed God to do what we was asking him to do. And we also, at the same time, because God was doing it in his own way instead of the way that we had it planned out, that we thought he wasn't doing anything at all. Not until time passes and we can look back on things and we can see where God had his hand at work, but it wasn't the way we thought it was going to be, so we just didn't see it. So Naaman says, this is not what I had in mind. He didn't come out and do this ritual. He didn't do anything. He didn't even come out himself. And so in a rage, he goes and he leaves. Second important character in this story is his servant. Because his servant comes to him and he says, what have you really got to lose here? I mean, if he told you to go do some great, overwhelming feat, you would have jumped at it. If he had performed some great big elaborate ceremony over you, you'd have jumped at it. But all he told you to do was go down to the Jordan River and dip 7 times. That's all you got to do. What have you got to lose? As I read this story again, I was reminded of Jesus at his first miracle in Cana. And you remember they run out of wine, and they go and tell Mary, and Mary comes and tells Jesus, and Jesus says, what's that got to do with me? Do you remember what Mary told the servants at that point? She turns to the servants, she says, whatever he, being Jesus, tells you to do, do it. And if you look at what they did, it made absolutely no sense at all. Israel and Judah. After Solomon, because Solomon had chased after so many foreign gods and chased after so many foreign women and had set up so many different foreign gods in the nation of Israel, that God told him that he was going to take the kingdom and rip it from him, but he would leave a small remnant because of his faithfulness to King David. And so, after Solomon died and his son Rehoboam came into power, at that point, because of poor decisions, 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel left the nation of Israel, and they became Israel. The two and a half tribes that were left became Judah. The nation of Judah would follow God for a while, and then they would depart from God for a while. They would follow God for a while, and they would depart from God for a while. They was wishy-washy. The nation of Israel never did follow God, because the king that took over there was afraid that if they went back to Jerusalem to worship, that they would go back and reunite as one country, and he would lose his job. So he set up golden calves. He set up all kinds of pagan idols and religions. The kings that lived in Israel from that point on just went from bad to worse. I mean, they had all kinds of different pagan religions. They sacrificed their children in fire. They did everything imaginable. But they never, not once, did they return to the God of Israel. And yet, God sent his prophets to the nation of Israel, trying to bring them back. Elijah, the greatest prophet in the Old Testament, came to Israel. His successor, Elisha, the one in the story, is in Samaria. Now you remember the story of Jesus. Whenever he found the Samaritans and the Israelites, or the Jewish people, they didn't get along. They hated each other. Where were they at? In Samaria. So even though this people was walking away from God, because there was just a few left in there that still served God, and because that God loved his people so much that he was long-suffering and tolerating their disobedience, that he sent Elisha, a great prophet, in the midst of Israel. He never abandoned his people, even though his people abandoned him. So, this whole deal is about grace. The grace of God that looks down and is not a respecter of people, but he is a respecter of hearts. And he heals this man who is against his nation. Let me get the last few verses, because it's important to see what happens next. Verses 15 through 19. When he returned to the man of God, this being Naaman, with all his company, and came and stood before him, he said, Behold, now I know there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now. But he said, As the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will take nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. This is Elisha. And Naaman said, If not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules loads of earth, for your servant will no more offer burnt offerings, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. In this manner may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And he said to him, Go in peace. So he departed from him some distance. Naaman comes out of that water, and he goes in furious. He comes out humble. And he looks, and his hands and his arms and all the places that had been white with leprosy and diseased with leprosy were now just like a newborn he's made a statement there. He says, I recognize that there's one God. You know. Now this is a big deal because those people worshiped many gods. And so he says, well then let me have a gift. Let me have 2 mule loads of dirt. So that whenever I go back and we go into the house of my master and worship his God, that I can put that dirt on the ground and I'm bowing on the ground of Israel. And please let the Lord pardon me for even being there. But by putting that dirt there for him to kneel on, he was honoring and signifying that this is the true God. And he realized that. A couple of things that I think that I've got out of this, and I hope that we can get out of this. The little girl in this story should teach us that wherever you're at and whatever's going on, just try to make the best of it. You know, we've all been angry at somebody before. Who does it hurt the worst? Ourselves. Every time. You know, half the time the person we're mad at, upset with, doesn't even know it. And more than that, they don't really care. But to have heart God, just because somebody's done you wrong, doesn't mean you write them off or you seek revenge. You know, this little girl could have just looked for ways to make matters worse, but she didn't. She could have been quiet